Good morning. It's early in San Francisco here. The sun's rising on my boat, so I don't have internet out here, but I'm calling in. So I apologize that I'm not there visually. This is such an interesting topic because it's something we kind of have been thinking about for a long time. I started a project back in 2011 really, called OpenROV. And ROV stands for remotely operated vehicle. And these are small, well, they're not necessarily small. A remotely operated vehicle is a device that's used to go underwater and for a pilot on the surface to be able to control them and see whatever the robot's seeing and perhaps manipulate and take samples and do a bunch of things. And when we started this project, those tools were really expensive. There were some commercial providers, and there was obviously, big ones used for oil and gas companies and military. And we wanted one. We wanted one for our own purposes, which is my friend Eric and I were looking for gold in an underwater cave, and there were all these rumors of gold, and no one had been to the bottom. And so we thought, hey, let's build a robot to go and explore. And it was kind of this fun project, but the vision was always much bigger. And that was, maybe we can use that story to get people excited about this idea of having this affordable, accessible, low-cost ROV. So we called the project OpenROV. And when we started it, it was very not finished and not working, right? So we had some preliminary designs, but the thing about an underwater robot is it's a very complicated machine because there's all sorts of challenging mechanical aspects, there's a bunch of challenging electronics aspects, and then there's all the software that's going to go along to run all of this. And so it became, we kind of attracted a bunch of attention on our site, and then we launched it on Kickstarter in 2012 and raised money for the original kind of OpenROV DIY kits. And we shipped those kits around the world to folks, and we slowly iterated and got better, based on feedback we were getting, and we were able to hire people. And eventually we got to the point where we were shipping thousands of these, and we realized, given the volumes that we were creating, we could actually create a product. Use mass manufacturing techniques to make something that was more robust and more accessible. And so I want to I also want to kind of, so what we did then is we created the Trident, which is our latest product, and we've been shipping those around the world as well. And so it's been a pretty interesting journey for us, and I think there's a few things that I want to tease out and reflect on. One, at first, is just this idea of open source, because we've always had kind of like a relationship to that I think I wish we would have had a better plan for it when we started. So we made the kit, all the kit aspects open source, and we kind of licensed it in a weird way where it was like a commercial, like a share-alike non-commercial. So we didn't really want people selling our kits because we needed to sell them in order to keep the kind of the base manufacturing stuff and community aspects funded. And so we did that for a while, and but it really, and then we kind of got to this point where we were developing a product, which was the Trident. And Trident was something that we really couldn't, there were so many aspects of it from a design perspective that we couldn't open source. Like we were using some parts that we needed to license from folks. And so we couldn't open source all of the Trident right away. We are going to be open sourcing a good portion of it to come. But I think that's a discussion that we've always had with the kind of the broader open source community and the open hardware community about what we're open sourcing and when and how. and all that stuff. And I think it's a really complicated and nuanced discussion. And this is something I've talked to the open source hardware community about a lot, is when to do that and when it makes sense and all of that. And I think if you're going into a project, it makes sense to really think about what your goals are. Because if you become a company, which we did, it really puts you on this path where you end up needing to kind of feed that beast, and to be it, like there becomes a tension between what you can open source and what you need to protect as a company to stay viable and all these things. So I think it's really important to know what you want, what your goals are, and what your outcomes you want to see. I also think, and I can happy to answer questions about that afterwards too. I also think it's worth talking about what really is a platform, because I've been in this world for a while, and people get really caught up on saying they're open source or saying they're a platform, when I think the true definition of a platform is not if you have open APIs, but it's that people are creating more value on top of your solution. So how many people are using it? How many people are taking what you've done and taking it further? I think that to me is truly what is needed in the space of science and conservation, is tools that are accessible and that can be built upon easily. So I think it's worth defining those two as separate things, like open APIs being open source, and then being a platform and being accessible as something separate and as important, if not more important, than kind of strictly how you define it from an open source perspective. Because what we've found now is that many, many, many more scientists are using our Trident just because it's really easy to use, and they can quickly use it out of the box, and for a bunch of other reasons. But rather than having to build our kit that was maybe open source that they could add sensors. Some scientists were for sure doing that, but many, many more, and many more conservation groups and students have been able to use the Trident just because it's been easier to use. So I think it's worth having a real discussion about so the benefits and trade-offs, and how to move, how to make things easier and more accessible, and how to really think about the architecture of participation. Because when I think about the challenges facing the natural world, so many of them are based on the fact that people just have this sense of apathy and that people aren't engaged. And it's not going to be enough if just the small group of scientists that we are and we know have tools that are lower cost. We have to think about how these tools are more accessible, and that how we build an architecture for participation and get people actually engaged in these issues, because that's the only thing that's going to actually change hearts and minds. The last thing I'll say is we've stumbled across a similar finding that Alistair has around group buying, and we took a slightly different approach to that. So we it really matters if you can get a lot of people together and buy these things in quantity and volumes. It's also an interesting idea to go and pitch that idea to philanthropists. And so what we did is we told a number of foundations, like the Moore Foundation and Rolex and the OceanX folks and National Geographic, about what we were doing, and we convinced them all to pre-buy almost 1,000 units that we're now able to give away to scientists and conservationists and students who are doing interesting things. So if you're in conservation technology, or you're a student doing a research project, or you're a citizen scientist and you're asking a question about a marine environment, and you think a Trident could be useful for your work, you can go to openexplorer.com/CSEE and fill out an application, and we can get you a a Trident for your field work. So I think there's so much there that we've just scratched the surface of like getting groups together to buy high volumes of these. I think Alistair has stumbled across something similar. And I think that model is something that there's still a lot of legs to run with that. And I think that what we've done with this kind of philanthropic buying, we call it advanced market commitments, but it's whatever name it takes, I think it's important. And I encourage all of you, if you're interested in getting one of our devices to use in the field, to going to the site and to filling it out and to seeing what all the interesting things are that people are doing right now. So that's about all I have to say. And I look forward to answering questions. Remember, I can't read them, so if you guys want me to answer them, I have to get someone else to read them to me.
Thanks a lot for that, David. That was fascinating. I was wondering, forgive me if you didn't cover this, when you were talking about sort of the lessons you learned at the start, and how you were the points around the licensing and you were forced to do a mixture of open source and closed. Like, is there anything you would do differently if you had your time again?
Yeah, totally. I think maybe we would have started off we ended up taking investment money before we were ready for it. We should have taken more grant funding. We should have pursued it we should have separated out the open source project from the commercial aspect sooner. And I think some groups, because otherwise you have to end up having to make this kind of hard fork that's kind of uncomfortable. I think we managed it well, but I think 3D Robotics is a good example. They started the Arjupilot project that was open source. And then they had a company that was using the open source protocol. And so they just separated it out well. And I wish we would have done something similar. That being said, they have a much higher level of engagement. So it's just the open source drone community is just much bigger. And than the ROV community. So the other thing is if it's just a handful of people who are contributing and you know them and actually they work for the company, it's do you really want someone else to be able to come? You want them to benefit from that. And it kind of I didn't feel like we were screwing anyone over, really. As we kind of went through the process, I was always kind of conscious of who was contributing and who was, getting the value from their contributions. But I would have separated it earlier and just made it cleaner, I think.
Yeah, right.
And actually,
sorry.
We're doing that now. We've figured out a way to do that now, and we'll be announcing stuff in the next couple of weeks about everything that's going to be open source, and I'm really excited about it now. I feel like we're gonna do something pretty cool.
So that was going to be my next question. It feels like between us confirming you as a speaker and us having this, that you guys went through some major changes with OpenROV becoming merging to become SOFA, right? Do you have any?
Correct.
What does can you talk a bit about what that means and what was behind that, and what you share what you can, understand that it's kind of a new moment for you, but I'm just kind of curious because that seems to be a big milestone in the evolution of this project, and the reason I'm asking is that so many questions were about how to make these sort of projects sustainable and scalable, and that kind of you're involved with a project that seems to be achieving that.
Appears to be achieving it. I think it's interesting because I do get this sense, we had this kind of philosophy back in 2011, and I don't know, does that seem early to you? I mean, I feel like there weren't a lot of models. We were basing our ideas off of what we were seeing in the maker world, 3D robotics and MakerBot, and we weren't necessarily we wanted to apply that to science and technology. Yeah. But we didn't really have a lot of good examples. Maybe the OpenPCR team, but those were our friends. I mean, we were coming up with these ideas together, on a boat. I remember sailing with those guys and thinking, hey, we should have this would be a good thing for science. And anyways, but it didn't, it felt really new. And I think what we did was one kind of path through the forest. And I think we're still trying to find our way. And I think we've learned some things that are really important. Like I talk about this advanced market commitment idea. I hope Alistair runs with that. I hope they go and find a foundation to pre-buy a bunch of audio mods or something. And I'd help them, you know, but I think like that was an important thing that we kind of, hey, that's a model that works. I don't think it was perfect. And I think everyone's path is going to be a little bit different, but I think it's okay that everybody's trying different ways to do this. I think that's okay, because I think we're going to learn a lot. And as long as we have meetups like this where we're talking honestly about what we're learning and what's going on, I think it's going to be a really positive thing in the end, because tools for science and exploration and conservation have been prohibitively expensive, because there's just a few scientists and there's just a few companies who have high margins, and everyone's doing fine. But we're kind of like poking at that model and saying, well, that's not okay because not enough people are engaged, and we're not doing enough to monitor and measure and understand our planet. And so I hope that we're successful, and I hope we're successful in building tools that are good, that are sufficient. But way more importantly, I hope that we're successful in getting people engaged. And then that's you know, I think we're still at the beginning of that battle.
Yeah. I just want to read out a couple. Tanya and Alistair throwing in some interesting comments. We might hold them to the end. There's just so you're aware, David, there's some interesting discussion happening around the tension between profit and conservation, and that even big tech giants like Google and Microsoft are going open source. And Joe, who's one of our team members, mentions that Google and Microsoft are some of the biggest open source contributors to GitHub. Yeah, there was a question.
I think you can do it, and I think you can do both, and I think it's a balance. But I think it's tricky when you're a super small team and it's an open source project and a company. Anyways, I wish we would have been like I wish we would have been better about it earlier. I think we're going to be better about it going forward. But yeah, it's tough when you're small and you're kind of like still feeling out what the project wants to be. Anyways.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a good point in that Akiva made, that like profit's important for financial stability, and if that's what you have on the table, and you might not necessarily have access to grant funding. I think there was also the point made that Tanya made this point, who's about to speak, that, you know, people investing in conservation don't necessarily want to fund tech, they want to fund field programs, and the stories that come from the field as well. I think it's a harder ask to get tech funded necessarily from grants. Maybe that's changing.
Yeah, it absolutely is, and I think we should be telling a story that it's worth funding. It's a category that's worth funding for sure.
Yeah. Okay.